Hello, everyone. Good to be with you again today. I am very excited. We have a guest with us today. Her name is Cheryl Beatty, and she's been a friend of mine for a very long time. And I just appreciate her insight and her wisdom, her understanding. And she's going to be bringing a lot of that to us today as we begin to go into and understand boundaries. And this is one of her specialties. So I'm excited to hear what she has to say. And so let's bring her on in and go from there. Hello, Cheryl. Good to have you with
Hello,
us today.
Cheryl. Yes.
So I've
That's
had
always
you.
fun. Yeah.
It is. I've had you on once before, and that was really great. And so, just really appreciate the insights that you bring from, your years of experience as well as, your professional side and, your Christian side. What people might not realize is that Cheryl here is a doctor of,
No, not a doctor. No,
oh, okay,
master, master of
Master
divinity.
Master of Divinity, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm giving you kudos, right? But yeah, Master of Divinity, so she has learned in the scripture and she's been a Christ follower for years, and so we're just going to let her take it away, and she's going to be bringing our teaching to us today on boundaries. So take it away, Cheryl. Go for it.
Okay. So, when we talk about boundaries, I mean, I think for me, it was a process, and I didn't really have a name for boundaries. And in the last probably 25 years ago, last 25 years, there's been a lot more people writing about boundaries. And the ones I tend to recommend are Cloud and Townsend, their books on boundaries. And they've got a whole series, and they've got a really good one called Safe People as well, which is good. Brene Brown, in sort of outside of the Christian realm, has done lots of good writing on boundaries as well. But the thing is, we tend to not understand it, especially if we grew up in a family where we weren't allowed to say, no, I don't like that, or yes, I would want to do it. And so then we reach our adult life and we don't have a clue about what a boundary even is. So let's start with a bit of a picture, which is you can think of if you live in a house or even if you live in an apartment, those are the locations that you're responsible for. And you're responsible to keep them clean. You're responsible to pay the mortgage and the taxes. You're responsible to cut your lawn if you have a house. And most towns, if you don't, you'll get fined by the city. So there's these expectations. Now, what happens is we get a neighbor, and the neighbor, say we're in a house, the neighbor decides to clean up their yard, and they dump everything on your yard. So does it become your problem? Not necessarily if the neighbor's going to clean it up. But if the neighbor isn't going to clean it up, then who has to clean it up? You do. And I use that illustration because a lot of times over the years in ministry and counseling, and I think I struggled with this too initially when I was going through healing. It's like, well, this person hurt me, and in a way, I want them to fix it. But they're probably not going to be able to, because that damage has been done to me. I've responded to it in a certain way. And so now I'm the one that has to take care of that offense or that garbage that landed in my yard. And that can be a real barrier for people that want healing, because they keep, and I think I thought this as well. I keep thinking the people that had disappointed me in my childhood, that they should be the ones to come and say, oh, I'm sorry, Cheryl, but they didn't have the capacity to do that. So, and sometimes they weren't around anymore. I think I was bullied sometimes mostly in elementary, not in the way bullying's talked about now. There was nothing physical, but mocking and words. And I don't even know who those people were. I didn't know who they were then. Those kids were then, and I certainly don't know who they are now. So I had to deal with those things, that garbage that got into my soul. Think of it that way. So when we talk about boundaries, the other thing we can think of in the present, so that's kind of looking in the past. Okay, people have dumped stuff in your yard, your apartment, um, that stuff in the past. In the present, we can think about, and this is an analogy I get from Cloud and Townsend, is a boundary is like a fence with a gate. And where the gate is, I have access to the latch. So I say what or who I let into my life, and who I say, no, sorry, that door is closed right now. Now, one of two things happen with that gate. One is if we have no boundaries, everyone can come into our yard. It doesn't really matter. And for some people I've known, we don't even ever bother to close the gate. And then we wonder, why are we getting hurt by different people? It's because we've let people into our lives that weren't really safe people for us. And that's a problem. The other thing that people do is that they will close that gate and like really hard to gain entry into that person's life, really hard. And that's hurtful to ourselves, and also doesn't we it means we don't realize that there can be different levels of friendship. So I tended, this was hard for me because I expected that if people were my friends, that it was very intimate and very personal. And so anyone that I called friend had to be in that category. Well, then I got kind of hurt because I moved to a different level of friendship with people, thinking that they were going the same way, and they weren't. And so we also have to think that when we open that gate, when we let people into our lives, that they're at different levels. So some people, I mean, Cheryl and I met, I was facilitating a group. She wasn't a friend, she was someone in the group. We connected over the years. She ended up working with me in ministry, and we became closer friends. But there's other people that were, came to be part of our ministry. And while they were friends, there was a different level, not better or worse, just a different level. I wasn't going to share some things with them that I would have shared with Cheryl or with another lady that worked with me named Louise. There was stuff that I wouldn't share, not because I didn't like them, but because it wasn't the level of our relationship. And when it comes to boundaries, that's one of the more difficult things that we have, is when I've worked with people individually about boundaries, they can often sort of open that gate too much, or really just keep it still closed all the time and talk to people over the fence. And that's not really opening up either. So it becomes really a kind of a learning curve. Expect to make mistakes, but that kind of happens. I also mentioned that there's different kind of boundaries. So first of all, there's a physical boundary. Physical boundary is who you allow touch you physically. Um, some people are huggers. They're great being hugged by anyone and everyone, and some people are not, and some people are in the middle. And it's okay to not want to be hugged by everyone at church on Sunday morning. It's okay. But, don't stand there like this. Just say, hey, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. So that's one boundary. Another boundary is psychological, or
Mm.
psychological thinking. So who we let influence our thoughts. And there certainly are people that have no boundaries around that. So a new teacher comes up, a new thought comes up, someone's popular in politics, and you don't even research anything. You just kind of go with them. That's not a boundary. You need to look into some of that stuff and do your own research. And just because it's popular on YouTube or anywhere else doesn't mean it's correct. And with social media now, that is a really difficult boundary for a lot of us. So you really need to research things that are talked about in social media before you adopt them. So in other words, if you go, oh, this person I follow, they said this on Facebook or on whatever the other ones are nowadays, and I like them, so I just believe that. That's like leaving your gate wide open for anything. And
Mm.
so you need to keep that gate closed until you actually really figure out if that's a credible source and something as a believer that uh, um, is biblical as well. Okay.
No, exactly. I was just going to add, especially with AI, because there are so many things that are out there, and it can sound and look like the person that you're following or that you like, and it's not them at all. It's just an AI generated picture and voice. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's
that's
good.
good too. That's good
Go ahead.
too. Then there's also emotional boundaries. So how I feel is how I feel. Someone might not like that, but I am how I feel. And we need to respect other people's emotional boundaries as well. So some people that you'll get to know and you think, wow, this is a great person and I really like to know them more. And emotionally, they might not be comfortable doing that. And that doesn't mean you're black and white, like you can't be their friend. But you maybe want to go to a deeper level and they don't want to, and that's okay. They can still be a friend and not go to that deep, deep level. That's okay. Time is a boundary.
Hmm. Good.
This week, my time boundary went crazy for some reason because I figured I was going to get all these things done, and there was interruptions, like printing things off before this session, and my printer would print off 2 pages and then it would die. So we can't always control time, but we need to have a sense of time so that we're not just like, oh, I'm going to do something and then it just overruns our whole day when it really should have just been a half an hour chore. So that's a boundary as well. And then spiritually, boundaries. Part of that is spiritually what we listen to and what we hear, um, and what we read. But it's also just a boundary around. Now, I'll throw this up. So some people, so I call myself a Christian. I was ordained in the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, and then I felt God leading me to the Anglican Church. And in the midst of that, or before I moved to the Anglican Church of Canada, I had attended a Baptist seminary to finish my MDiv. Okay. For me, I am comfortable with that breadth. I can say that these people all love the Lord. There's some differences doctrinally in the secondary stuff, but I'm comfortable within that. Other people, their boundary is, I've always been a Baptist, a Methodist, a whatever, and they're only comfortable in that boundary. No, I do like to see people more wider, but I understand that some people, that's their comfort zone, and so that's where they are, and that's okay. But that's also a form of a spiritual boundary, and I think that's something we don't really consider. And as I say that, it's not that I don't like that preacher, I'm going to another church. It's really about where God leads us. And so in all those situations, even when I went back to the Anglican Church, I had been teaching at a local Anglican church that was probably what you'd call a somewhat charismatic Anglican church. And I was with Pentecostal churches at the time. And I remember saying to someone, oh, if I knew there was charismatic Anglicans, I never would have left. And I felt something tap me on the shoulder, like, oh, okay. So it was a process for me to kind of come to terms with that and make the change. But I knew that it was the Holy Spirit. And I knew it was an act of reconciliation in a large measure and honoring my roots. My grandmother was a devout Christian. I was just reading something recently in some photos I had of her that she had been the Sunday school superintendent at the Anglican Church in Hartney, Manitoba for like 60 years. Yeah. So she was solid. She was solid. But remember that boundary. I mean, it's okay to have this, I was raised Baptist and now I'm Baptist and I'm okay being Baptist. But if Baptist isn't working for you anymore, there's other places within the Christian church that would maybe be a bit or where God's calling you, and just to be open to that, not to just leave because you're upset with how the pastor preaches.
Mhm.
So that's a different kind of a boundary, but I just thought I'd touch on that.
Would you consider that those same boundaries would exist, say, around inner healing, deliverance, that kind of thing, as well as I had another thought. Oh, once, like, kind of a once saved, always saved. Do you think that there's boundaries around that too, that people like? How would you? I'm asking. Is that?
Well, with inner healing and prayer ministry and that kind of stuff, I think the boundary always has to be, if you're in that kind of ministry and someone comes to you and says, "Hey, can we pray through this?" If you're the one doing that, praying for that, in helping that person with the inner healing, you always have to be asking them, "Okay, is it okay if we take this next step?" Because they're allowed to say, "Well, this is great, but I'm overwhelmed right now.
Mm,
Can we get together in 2 weeks, or can I call you when I'm ready for the next step?"
right.
So there definitely is that. And certainly when I've been working in counseling, there was that was always there. I mean, and if you work in those kind of areas, inner healing, counseling, whatever, you should be able to start to notice that while you're going to ask, you're also going to start to feel like, okay, I think that's enough for today. I think we've gone far enough. So in that regard, yes, we need, if we're those practitioners, we need to have boundaries. And if we're receiving that ministry or going for counseling, we need to be able to say, hey, like, let's just, can I just take a break for a while? Yeah.
Good. That's good. Excellent. Go ahead.
There was something else there that you asked about boundaries, and I
Uh,
didn't write it down. Okay.
I didn't write it down.
Oh, once saved, always saved, or
Yes,
something like that?
that's it. Like, differences of doctrine, I
Oh
guess.
yeah, differences of doctrine.
Yeah.
So in the, in the Anglican Church, we say the Apostles' Creed. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. It doesn't actually say how he made heaven and earth, but I believe he did. Jesus Christ, his only son. And then it goes on other things like I believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. So those are basic Christian doctrines. You need those. You need boundaries around those. All those other things are secondary.
Hmm.
A lot of people would. So an example, in the Pentecostal church, it was if you were filled with the Holy Spirit, then you spoke in other tongues.
Hmm.
But not everyone does.
Mm,
So does that mean the Holy Spirit isn't in them? No, because if
right.
Jesus is in you and it's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, then the Holy Spirit is still in you, just maybe working in a different way. But those can be boundaries. So there was a time where there was no way I was going to another church that didn't teach that type of um, doctrine of the filling of the Holy Spirit. And now I'm okay with that. That doesn't mean I was wrong before or I'm right now. It's again a boundary where I'm able to operate in.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
So doctrinally, as long as you need to have that basic,
Right.
right? And after that, and you can go look up the Apostles' Creed online if you want, you'll find it somewhere. Um, that's the basic thing as Christians we need to agree with. If
Right.
you can't agree with those, then that is an issue, because
Hmm.
those are the foundations for the last over 2,000 years. Those are foundations of what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Good.
Yeah. And that's sort of why I tended to always really enjoy, like when we had the ministry in Edmonton, the area of town I was in, we had a regular interdenominational pastors gathering and prayed together. And I loved that. But I know that there was people that didn't come to that even as pastors because they didn't feel comfortable doing that. And that to me was sad, but it's like, well, you know, whenever God says it's okay for you, then you're welcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Okay.
So any other
No,
questions?
that's it. You just keep going now. That's all good.
No,
Sorry to
but that's
interrupt.
all I have.
Oh, okay. Well, was there?
Okay, no, here, I'll give you a couple. So
Okay,
I think I mentioned that fence with the gate.
right.
The gate can be, we need to have discernment on who we let in and who we don't, and how far into our yard and maybe not as far into our yard. Um, so if we don't have that discernment, we let everyone and everything into our life, which isn't helpful. But if we have walls,
Mm-hmm,
then we're very isolated, and no one really gets to know the wonderful people we are,
mm-hmm,
and that's not good either. So you want to be really careful that you don't put up walls. And
mm-hmm.
I had someone mention to me quite a few years ago. They asked me, did it matter what the fence with the gate is built with?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, no one had asked me that before.
I've never been
And
asked
I,
that either.
yeah, and I'm like, oh, let me think about that. And I finally said, and I said, well, what is yours made of? She goes, barbed wire.
Oh,
And I said, but have you been opening the gate? Like, can you open the gate for some people? She said, yes, I can. And I said, I don't think it matters what the fence and the
wow.
gate are built out of, as long as you're willing to open that gate when you've discerned that people are safe.
That's good. And I
Yeah.
will say this, I grew up on the farm, on a ranch, on a farm, farming community, and fences are replaced all the time, right?
Oh, that's
Right?
interesting.
You
Okay.
don't just
Yeah.
put them up and then they just stay there, because, cows can be cows. There's a reason we eat them, and so, if they decide they don't want to be fenced, right? Like they can
They can, yeah.
push them over, especially after a big rain or something like that, and then you have to fence, right? They have to go
Yeah.
rebuild the fence, right? And sometimes you just the fence is old and you just have to tear the whole thing down and start over, right? And so yeah, the fence can always, if it's made of barbed wire, it can always be made of something else later on.
Something else. Yeah.
Change
Yeah.
it.
And this person did have a lot of abuse in their past. And so
Mhm,
they were being overly cautious. But as long as if someone approached, they were willing to consider
mhm.
opening that gate, it's okay. And on that note, one of the things, and I'm quite sure this was my struggle at some point in not going to talk to a therapist about my stuff, was what we want is someone's come and dumped garbage in our yard.
Mhm.
We were kids, we were teens, we were adults, whenever that happened. Someone else dumped that in our yard. And so we really want them to fix the problem.
Yeah.
But it's now in our yard. We have to take responsibility for it
Mhm. Mhm.
because we didn't know before that we couldn't, that we had the right to say, no, you can't get that close in my life. Or we were kids and we had no ability to do that. So when if people are watching right now and they're like, well, yeah, this happened when I was 16, or this happened, I was really betrayed at work or something, and that anger is still there, that is your responsibility to get healing from. And they're not going to come. I'm sorry, they're not going to come and say, oh, I'm really sorry I did this, and this. Because a lot of times they don't even realize how hurtful something has been.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's really good. And I think, it's been my experience that, and you knew me when I had well, I didn't really have boundaries, but I had a lot of walls. You could
Yeah,
go
you got a lot of those. Yeah.
this girl with no boundaries, but lots of walls. And we'll get into that in a minute. because I want to know what the difference you would say is between a difference between a boundary and a wall. But before that, I want to say this. I think that, in light of what you're just saying, that, we can, for me, it's been my experience that as I dealt with the unforgiveness, as I came to a point of being able to actually forgive a person for something that they have done, and I don't mean just surface, but I mean in-depth
Yeah.
forgiveness, right? That I opened the door not just for my freedom, but for them then to be able to come and to apologize, right? Because when we hold on to the hurt that's been done to us, we tend to push people away, right? Like we wall up, right? And
Yeah.
then that makes us unapproachable too,
Yeah.
right? And so I think, for me, that is, one of the things that, as I've learned how to forgive and to release, that I found that there's been a few people that have come, not everybody, and of course people die, right? Like, if it's your parents who've dumped garbage into your backyard, and if they're gone, you can still deal with that without them being
Yeah.
here. So I wanted to share, one thing that, a gal years ago had shared with me. Also, had come out of a home of a lot of abuse, and so I gave her this, and the same analogy with the backyard and the fence and all that kind of stuff. And, when I said to her, I kept asking her, "So why are you building the fence?" And she goes, "To protect my neighbors from me." And I
Oh,
said, "Okay." So then I would take it from another side point and I would go, "Okay, but okay, so let's look at this and this and this." And she, every time, and we worked on this for a long time, boundaries and, that kind of thing. And her answer was the same until she got breakthrough. And it was that I need to build a boundary. And she was just a little thing, right? And she was
mm,
very weak and didn't, um, kind of in many ways, in some ways like Louise, right? And so,
oh, okay.
she needed to build a fence to protect her neighbors from her. I'm like, no. So this is how our past and our wounding can affect so much of how we think and give us those wrong mindsets and everything. So I just wanted to share that with you because that was the one that I'm like, man, I've never heard that one before, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
So
yeah, I can see though if someone's felt like they were always they were a
yeah.
victim, but they always felt that they were the problem. Someone probably told them that many times in their lives. So I could see where they would think that. One of the things though about forgiveness, and this is really important, that starting the process doesn't mean you have to start with forgiveness.
Right. No, for sure.
Because for some people that garbage is just such a huge mess of how they've been hurt and wounded and taken advantage of, that thought of I need to forgive these people is just like, what?
Hmm.
They are evil, and they might be.
It's true.
So then you probably need some healing yourself to get to that point of forgiveness. So don't, if that thought, if all the garbage in your yard is so much that the thought of starting at forgiveness is
Yeah.
just like I can't do that, then that's okay.
Yeah.
Do the other stuff. Do with the wounding. Deal with understanding how that wounding affected you and how you've responded to it, and you will get to that other place.
Hmm.
It is I think I used to think forgiveness was like, I choose to forgive so and so.
Mm,
And then I realized it was like a lot more than that.
a lot more.
Yeah, and it was oversimplified. And because it was oversimplified, if I did say, well, actually, that's not true. I'm going to take this back. I remember being in church, and whatever the sermon was, I don't remember, but I remember feeling like I needed to say, I forgive my mom and dad. So I said that in my head. I forgive my mom and dad. Did anything change? No. But probably within a year or two of that, I started going for counseling.
Mm,
And then I was starting to walk more in that forgiveness,
hmm.
still with boundaries, but I was able to kind of start processing what forgiveness really is. There's Neil Anderson in his Steps to Freedom in Christ. Can't remember what step it is, but he has a really good explanation of what forgiveness is and what it isn't. And one of the things he does talk about, which I totally have come to agree with, is a phrase like, I choose to forgive so and so because they did this to me and it made me feel. So that's a good place to start. I choose to forgive my cousin for what they did to me because it made me feel. And then on the end, and I release them to God to heal them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the acknowledging the pain it caused you is where the real release actually comes from.
Yeah.
Because you can look at an event, whether it's mom, dad, the person who sexually abused you, or, whatever it is, you can look at that and acknowledge the event. And acknowledging the event is a huge step, but it's the acknowledging how it made you feel. Like, I
Yeah.
felt so vulnerable. I felt so afraid. I felt so whatever, so foolish, right? Like, it's acknowledging all of that. I was so ashamed, so embarrassed, so whatever, and acknowledging that and asking the Lord to come in and bring healing into that too, right? Like, so that you can release them. It's
Release.
undoing
Yeah.
it's undoing the stitching, if I can say that, right? Like, for anybody who's ever made anything, and we all, back in the day, we had to do home ec and we had to sew things, and I
Mhm.
made two left sides of the same vest. So I'm not the sewer, but I did have to take it out, and it was one stitch at a time. And
Most good
so it
analogy. Yeah.
was, yeah. So it's just taking the stitching out, and each stitch then represents something that you need to acknowledge about the pain that you have felt, and what they did. Being specific, right? Being specific is important in the whole journey of
Yeah.
forgiving
Yeah.
properly. So yeah, I
Yeah.
teach that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I started doing is I guess I haven't thought of it as a boundary, but I guess it is in the present when I've been hurt by someone. I have a little prayer which is really, and I have to have a physical part of these prayers.
Mm,
So I
okay.
choose to forgive so and so for this, whatever they did, and I release them to you. Now the problem we all have is the people that have hurt us. We say, I release them to God and let him deal with them.
Mm.
But really, I want to deal with them.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
I wanna say the woulda, shoulda, couldas, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that can be a boundary sort of moving ahead when there's people that maybe you haven't set healthy boundaries, or maybe you've tried to and they've crossed over them, is just like, okay, God, I forgive them and I release them to you. And you're not letting that unforgiveness really fester then. And
Right.
that's a boundary because it's God's issue to deal with them. It's not your issue to deal with them.
That's right. That's right.
And sometimes in the church there was a season where it was a thing to confront people, and oh, did that go overboard. So sometimes you do need to, especially if it's someone that's been a friend, that really has been a friend, and they've done something. Sometimes you do need to say, look, when you did this, it really hurt me, and hopefully there be reconciliation. But a lot of times it's not going to happen. And
Mhm,
so let God deal with them.
mhm,
You don't have to go around telling everyone how bad they are, how badly they've hurted you. Because also, if we don't have boundaries, we think everyone hasn't treated us well.
that's good. No, that's good. I think I'm one of those people who I do believe in confrontation, discussion, right?
Discussion.
Like,
Let's use that
discussion,
word. Yeah.
let's use that
Yeah.
word, discussion, right? Because I think that, I'm a Matthew principle person, right? Like,
Yeah.
if like, you need to go and you need to have the conversation, you need to try to rectify it. And you don't know that if you don't do it. And I think, I mean, if you're good friends, right? And if something has been said, like you said, oftentimes they don't realize what they've done has been
Mhm.
hurtful to you. And sometimes it's as simple as just, okay, well, what you did hurt me, right? And then they'll go, oh wow, I'm so sorry, right? Like I didn't mean to hurt you. But I think there's validity in the discussion, as long as it's a discussion and not an attack. And I think sometimes
Yeah.
when we go confrontation, then we come at it, and oftentimes it can be an attack. It's like
Yeah.
you did, and our heart always has to be in a right position when we come to somebody and we have a conversation with them about something they've said or done. And that's an important aspect of it too. Like I always tell people, run it through yourself first. You want to have the conversation, you make sure your heart is right before you go to do it, right? Because if it's not, it's going to come out sounding angry, it's going to come out being punchy, it's going to come out accusatory, it's going to come out all those ways you don't want it to. Maybe you do want it to be that way, but that we wouldn't want
Not helpful. Maybe
not
not helpful
helpful.
ways.
And
Yeah.
we don't want to cause more pain in the relationship. So running it through yourself and making sure that your heart is right before you go to have the conversation is huge. Huge.
Yeah. 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 Back to the yard analogy, like if your neighbor has a tree and it's hanging over into your yard and you hate it, you can do two things. You can go and say, "Hey, would it be okay if we just trimmed that side of the tree back a little bit?" Because if you just go and cut his tree, not going to be happy, right? Not going to be happy. But I mean, my experience in home ownership is that kind of stuff usually just a conversation helps.
Well, I'm laughing only because in Stony Plain I have my house is there, and Joel and Amy live in the house, and my neighbor directly behind us, they have a tree, and the roots are growing up into my yard. And so the
Oh,
whole thought has been, and the original owners are gone. It's now a lovely tree, and but it's just, like I end up with all these little shoots of trees all over my backyard. So it's like, how, and this has been conversation since James was passing. How can we kill that tree without without upsetting the neighbor? So
well,
you're
you
telling
can't.
me
Yeah, you have to talk to the neighbor.
oh, all right.
Yeah, you have to talk to the neighbor. I mean, you can whip or snip those things that grow up, but yeah. So also, if you're planting a tree, consider your neighbor. That would,
Right.
you're planting a tree, consider how it affects your neighbor. Yeah.
That's
Unfortunately, I've always had good neighbors that in the street we live on now, my husband and I, it's like house on one side, two houses down. In the winter, it's like who gets out there first to clean off everyone's snow, which is so lovely. Isn't that
that's
lovely?
lovely. That is
Yeah.
lovely.
I mean, especially because it's not expected, like if someone was doing that, expecting it to happen the other way, then that's going to be a boundary issue. But if people are just doing it to be good neighbors, it's a fine thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
And
true.
they do. It's like, he'll see someone else is out there, so he's out there,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, can you explain the difference between a wall and a boundary for us?
Well, a wall has no way to get through. There is no way, there is no way at all to get through to that person. Um, Unless you kick a hole or blast a hole in the wall, which then is disrespecting the person that built the wall. So you can't really do that. So you could still have a wall, but there needs to be a way to get through that fence. So a wall is there's no way through. When I gave the illustration about the person who said, "Well, I have a fence and a gate, and I do open it, but the fence is barbed wire," like there's still a gate there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A wall, there is no way through.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's good. And I remember being in about the seventh grade, I'm going to say. I think it's probably about the seventh grade. And I think I've told you this story anyway, but I remember because of the home life that I had, right? Like the chaos of, all the stuff that was going on, the angry dad, the alcoholic dad, the sexual abuse, the bullying that I was going through at school, is that I had just decided that I wasn't going to allow myself to be hurt anymore. And so I remember sitting there in my desk in class and building an invisible wall around me made of glass bricks, right? Like those big, heavy glass bricks, right? They
Yeah.
couldn't be broken, but I remember building it so that I could see out, but nobody could hurt me. And, be darned if when I got saved, the Lord didn't make me take that thing down brick by brick. And so, boundaries are fine, but walls are, again, they keep you isolated, I think,
Yeah.
too, right? Like they keep you locked in that pain, and they keep you locked in your past a lot of the times too, right? Because we're
Yeah.
not,
Yeah,
we're not,
because we're not dealing with that garbage is there in our lives, just fermenting and getting stinkier and stinkier. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And like you said, you can see out with your glass bricks, but my recollection of glass bricks is the looking out is still pretty distorted. Yeah.
it's good. And that's true. I didn't realize that, I don't think at the time. I just felt like, and the interesting thing is that, and we dealt with this years ago. And when I went, and I even did some individual counseling, if you remember that, with Cornerstone in the city. And I found that, you know, when you're in that place, after I built the wall, that summer I went home, and because many of my bullies, the school I was in only went up to grade 8, and so I was now going to be one of the grade 8 students the following year. And so what I did is I went home, and because I had built the wall, I went into such a state of creating my own past that I was unable, that when I went back to school in the fall, like everybody's like, what happened to you? You're a completely different person. And it's just because I had refused to look at that stuff, right? And so I just pretended it had never happened. And then one day, it was still in the fall, somebody came up to me and they said, "You're so different. It's almost like the things that have happened to you never happened to you." And I go, "What are you talking about?" It's like I had no recollection of it. And she goes, "Well, like this, and this." And everything just went wow. And I'm like, "Thanks for that. I was doing pretty good until now." But that was actually a blessing, because we can't pretend that the awful things that happened to us didn't happen to us, because that will actually cripple us, I think, in the future. Like we have to
Yeah, yeah,
those things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's when people talk about dissociation in psychology, a lot of times people still think of, oh, this person has multiple personalities. But
Mhm,
dissociation is really it's 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 over here.
mhm.
I'm not looking at it. I'm la 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 pretending it's not there. That's really what dissociation is.
Yeah.
So that's when you hear people that have um I think the term is repressed memories,
Mhm, mhm,
or they're going for counseling and they're working through stuff and all of a sudden they have this memory come back.
mm,
That's because that's what they did too. They just put that over here and tried to hide it away, so we could survive. So
mhm.
I mean, we are well equipped as human beings to come up with ways to survive, but it's one thing to survive and it's another thing to thrive.
Mhm. That's good.
Yeah.
That's Yeah, and I think, it's easy enough to do. And but I think that, the hand of God was on me even then before I was saved, to make sure that I did not allow that to become my reality, because it
Yeah.
wasn't the truth, right? And he wanted me to live in the real, raw, and honest world, right? Even though it sometimes sucks, right? And, looking at it, it can be difficult and painful. It's important to be able to look at those things and allow the Lord to do the work that he needs to do. So
Mhm. Mhm.
recreating something. And that's why, anyway, that's a whole nother topic. I'm not going to go to where I was just going to go. But
Okay.
let's talk about, let's get a little bit more into the physical boundary aspect. I want to go into physical. You mentioned physical, psychological, emotional, time boundaries. We won't get into. Talked a little bit about religion and spiritual boundaries, but let's say, like, like physical, the one thing that I find, and this is probably more, I'm thinking, a psychological, Like, who do we allow to influence our thinking? The manipulations of other people, right? Like, there's a lot of information, like just a glut of information on narcissists right now. And
Oh,
so, everybody's a narcissist, right?
yes, yes,
Reality is, yes, they might be, but they might not be, but they might have
yeah.
tendencies, and we all have tendencies to be something at some point or another,
Yeah.
right? And so that manipulation is that one of those psychological boundaries, like that thinking that you're allowing them to dictate your thought life, right? Like, because it's a manipulation of,
What now are you saying that a manipulation of from an individual person
yeah.
that you're saying, "Oh, they're a narcissist," and
No,
really
no, I'm
no,
just
no, oh, okay.
No, I'm saying that there is a lot of information out there. So what people tend to do is they tend to jump to that right away, as opposed
Oh,
to
okay.
going, but let's talk about somebody who's a manipulator, because that's one of the things that narcissists tend to do. But you don't need to be a narcissist in order to be a manipulator, right?
We all manipulate people
Right.
at one time or another.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so when we talk about manipulation, like boundaries like that, around that kind of thing, let's say you've got an A game manipulator in your life. How do you put up a boundary with somebody who's a manipulator?
Okay, that's a good one. So I would say the and first thing is ask yourself why you're allowing yourself to be manipulated.
Hmm.
Why you're allowing yourself to do something or think something that you really don't want to think. So it might be that the pattern of being manipulated, of not owning your own thoughts and actions is
Hmm.
a childhood thing that you need to go back and deal with that root. Um, it might be that you are somewhat scared to say no to that person. And then maybe there's something there that you need to look at. Maybe, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, um, just fear,
Right.
because maybe that's about, in your past you said to someone no and you got beaten up or
Mm.
you got isolated or something, right? So to ask yourself those questions. And then I think also with that is to say, what is it about this person that I really want them to like me? In
Mm.
other words, if I do what they'll want me to do, then they'll like me. What is it in me that really makes me want to have them like me?
Right. That's good.
And I think, sometimes I wonder sometimes if that would be the root for a lot of us is we all want to be loved and appreciated.
Hmm.
And if we don't get that some other way and there's a person there that is, manipulative, so we want them to do. We do what they want us to do because we think then we'll be liked,
Hmm.
right? So, and then we start to realize, I'm resentful about that. So what is that about? And that's often how we start to realize it's a manipulation and there's nothing that we're ever going to be able to do for that person to really care about us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because very often, how do you feel about this statement? I think that sometimes when people are good manipulators, right? The reality is that they don't really care anyway. They don't care about what they're doing to you as long as they get what they want, right? So, manipulation is a self-serving kind of a tactic, I guess. I mean, I'm a mother. I manipulated my kids when they were little, right? If you clean your room, we'll go get a chocolate bar. If you clean your room, we'll go get an ice cream. We've all done
Yes.
it as parents.
Yeah.
We're all guilty, of control and manipulation with our children. Um,
That's called motivation.
that's what everybody tells me, but it's really
That's called
manipulation.
motivation.
It's
It's
still
healthy manipulation,
healthy
motivation.
manipulation. Yes, true. So looking at it like that and just going, okay, so but manipulation, people who manipulate, who lie and distort the truth, right, for their own gain, there's really only one person that they are looking out for, and it's not
It's
you.
themselves. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, that's where if you start to have your own boundaries, you start to recognize, wait, why am I letting this into my life? I'm gonna close that door and not respond to them. And they'll get angry. They'll get angry or they'll get silent.
Mhm,
Um, and you have to decide ahead of time, is that going to be okay?
mhm. Yeah, boundaries do change your relationships, that's for sure.
Yeah. And for some people, and honestly, for some people, they don't actually, they maybe grew up with a manipulative, really manipulative parent, and that's how they related. And no one said to them, no, that's not right. And for some people, they will go, oh, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. What,
Mm,
how should I have asked you that? That doesn't happen all very much at all, but there is some people where that's just a pattern they're in and they don't know that there's another way to relate.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, there's so many other places that we could go. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I've got to figure out what my next, but I was thinking, boundaries in marriage, because that's a big one too, right? Boundary in relationships in general, like male, female, dating, red flag kind of relationships once you're married. How do you like, boundaries around all of that? Like maybe that's a whole different segment, right? Like we could probably do a whole hour on that alone.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you could
Yeah.
shell it.
Yeah. So I think boundaries in any kind of close relationship is about you continuing to be you and the other person to be continuing to be them with their likes and dislikes. With, like my husband's ridden a motorcycle since he was 16. And when we started dating, I thought, oh, I'll go on a motorcycle ride. Well, I went on 2 trips. Two? Yeah, I think I did 2. And there was parts of it was fun, but there was parts of it like, no, no, not really for me. Not really for me. And but like he has friends that he rides with, and every year they go on this trip, but for the last couple of years he's not gone. And I'm always saying to him, like, go, you enjoy it. Like, that's a healthy that's a healthy boundary. If your spouse likes to do some sport or something that you're not into, like, don't say don't do that because I don't like it. They are allowed to enjoy the things they enjoy. I play my guitar. Oh, this is a good boundary. I play guitar, and I used to, when I was a kid, took piano lessons. But what would happen is my dad didn't like to come home to Cheryl practicing on the piano. And so I basically, when I got home from school, and I didn't start piano lessons till I was in grade 7.
Oh.
So then with the piano teacher I was with, when she'd have these recitals, I'd been playing these little songs that the kids that started when they're in grade 1 are making sound even better. So that was difficult for me, but was harder that the only time I could play the piano was when dad wasn't home.
Mm,
So that, and I understand he had a long day and all that kind of stuff, but it basically meant I stopped playing piano. So then when I was in high school and I started working part-time, I wanted to play the guitar. It was also the 1970s, so everyone was playing guitars. And so I paid for my guitar lessons. I paid for my first guitar, and I still play the guitar.
mm,
Not great, but I'm okay. And one of the things with the guitar, I could close my bedroom door and
mm,
then it didn't disrupt anyone. So I found a way to sing and do music, even though someone else's boundary was difficult. I found a way.
mhm.
And so now, this was just a few months ago. I said to my husband, "Oh, what do you think of my guitar playing?" And he goes, "I don't know. You close the door so I can never hear you." And I went, "Oh my goodness, I
Wow.
can't believe I'm doing that." And that imprinted so
Wow.
significantly on me. that I wasn't trying to lock them out. That's just how I learned how you practice at home, is you keep the door closed and you don't bother people. So now I leave the door open and I play.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was like, so you think you sort of work through a lot of these things and then you realize, oh,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just deal with it. You don't beat yourself up about it. You just deal with it. And hopefully you have someone loving in your family that can say those kind of things. Like,
Yeah, that's
when you're
good.
not offended, you just go, yeah, what? Why?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I do that because,
because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's good. That's a really good example. So the last thing I kind of want to just kind of talk about before we close out here is that in the last, since James has passed away, which has been 7 years now, around
Wow.
that time, I know, crazy, right? I started to put some I started to put some boundaries around family, right? My family,
Mhm.
my siblings and stuff.
Yeah.
And so that has caused a few conversations, and not that those conversations, I welcome them, right?
Mhm.
But even when the excuse me, even when it comes down to, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z because we're family, right? And this, like, the whole family thing is a whole issue,
Oh,
whole
yeah.
all on
Yeah.
its own.
Yeah.
But I found that as I put up my boundaries and as I allowed myself to continue to stay in those boundaries and to sorry, cat, not, hopefully not incoming, um, that I had that I feel like I'm just doing so much better. He doesn't
I
listen very well.
Yeah. He doesn't have boundaries.
He
Cats
doesn't
cats
like,
don't
yeah,
have
none.
boundaries.
I
Yeah.
have none, and he
Yeah.
has especially none because he's 14 now, so none.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I found that as I put up the boundaries and as I dealt with the issues as to why I was putting up the boundary in the first place, boundary number one to me was like, okay, I don't deserve, there's nothing I've done that deserves to be treated this way. That could be a number one boundary. Like, the way that you treat me is unacceptable. So therefore, I can put a boundary up, because if you're going to do this, then I'm going to leave, right? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
going to put up the boundary. And so if you're going to lie and lie about me, then I don't need to engage in the conversation. I don't need to be engaged in that, right? In that relationship. And so putting up the boundaries has really changed a lot of dynamics. But at the same time, what it has done, it has given me a lot of clarity, and I just feel so much healthier, right? Like, I just feel
Yeah.
so much better, and I feel stronger emotionally, spiritually, even physically. I just feel so much better because I have relationship. It's just different. Like, I will have those relationships, I'll have those conversations, I'll go visit them, they will come and visit me, and that's fine. But here's the boundaries. And if
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
boundaries
Exactly.
are
Exactly.
crossed, then understand this is what I'm going to do. I have forgiven. It's not about that. It's just that I'm no longer willing to participate in that kind of behavior. And
Mhm.
so um, those toxic family or toxic relationships can often, they need boundaries. Do you want to just touch on that briefly?
Yeah, and I'm gonna challenge you a bit on your phrasing. You talk about putting up the boundary. Change that to close the gate,
Ah, okay. Okay.
because putting up a boundary is about a wall, not a fence with a gate. So just maybe change
Okay.
that.
Closing the gate. All right. That's
Okay,
good.
yes, that
Okay.
close the gate.
Close the gate.
Yeah, in families there, and I think, I mean, it varies for different people what a good family is supposed to look like.
Mhm.
Um, and if some of those things that go on in your family and your extended family just feel not healthy for you, not helpful for you, then maybe you need to close the gate on something. So an example would be, if every Christmas it was expectation of all the adult children to come back home every Christmas, but that meant those adult children were maybe married and their spouse's family wanted to see them once in a while. So, closing the gate on that would be, okay, we can do every second year or every third year, or, things like that, that you discuss with people, not in a way like I'm doing this to harm you, but
Right.
here's how my life operates, and I need to think about these other things as well. Um, so I think those are things, even in healthy functional families, that healthy functional families then talk about, and don't take, oh, you're not coming home for Christmas, as rejection,
Right.
right? So in a healthy family, you can do that. In a not so healthy family, then those conversations can become somewhat difficult. And I found when my mom and dad were alive and I would go back to Winnipeg, I I realized I had to limit my time. So I figured out where the time, how many days it was where I still really was happy to see them, and then I needed to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a counselor helped me work that out, actually, because I was feeling obligated as
Mm-hmm.
a daughter, feeling obligated, which, yeah, we do have some obligations to our parents, especially as they age. But I was my expectations weren't helping me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those family things, but I think, and the other side of it, I have seen people where they put they put really unrealistic expectations on what they expect their family to give them back emotionally,
Right.
especially if there's been, they've been wounded somehow in their childhood or teen or adult. And then it's like they expect that all that's going to get healed. Their family's all of a sudden going to be wonderful and everything will be healed. And that's often not the case. I mean, the healthy parenting I got was through other people in my adult life
Right.
that was pretty much like parenting that I maybe would have been good to have when I was a kid. But
Mm-hmm.
my parents, because they had their own stuff, they couldn't do it, right? Not because they were mean or evil, they just couldn't do it.
Right.
So I think those conversations really, before you close the gate on a family relationship, you
Mm-hmm.
really need to ponder it, talk to someone about it, and what would be like, because often our tendency is black and white. So I'm just never going to talk to them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with me, with my dad. I'd phone my parents every Sunday afternoon, and I got to the point where I realized with my dad, the conversation was about the weather in Winnipeg and the weather in Edmonton. And I wished it was more.
Yeah.
That was all he was capable of.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So I learned to be okay with that. I learned to not have that gate wide open
Right.
for what I wanted from a father that he wasn't capable of giving.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. It's very good. Well, this has been really good, and I'm excited to, maybe explore some of these other things on another day.
For
And
sure.
yeah, this is really good. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I appreciate you and the years of friendship and just the years of wisdom. This is my go-to person for everybody who wants to know. Whenever I've had anything going on in my life I'm not sure how to handle, or this is the woman. So now you've got a face. So thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm going to put you
Welcome.
into the waiting room and don't go anywhere.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. That was a really impactful, powerful hour that we had, learning things about boundaries and just what God is, doing, and how we need to, look at our own boundaries and have boundaries with other people. So I hope you find this very encouraging as you listen to it, very helpful. We will, of course, have Cheryl on back on another day. So thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.